Welcome to the first ever Pop Culture Power Show, and I am here with Mr. Randy EMBERLIN, the co-creator of Carnage, but not only that, one of the best inkers, if not the most legendary inkers of all time, and one of my personal favorites, and my wife's. And
thanks for that. It's always great to get kudos on that stuff.
Yes.
Yeah, there's a lot of great inkers, that's for sure. And you know, when I got into the business, I had been an animator for like 10 years, but I always collected comics and drew and wanted to get into comics, and it was a miracle that I got in because I lived in Portland, Oregon, and I wasn't going to move to New York. But a friend of mine from first grade, Chris Warner, he's an editor at Dark Horse Comics now for like 26 years, and he went to New York with his portfolio after showing it in Portland. And he got hired. He worked. Larry Hama's here at this show, and Larry actually kind of helped train him back in the day when they made you redo. They gave you a script, a story that you had to draw, and it was difficult. And then eventually he did it. And once he got work, he was able to get me to get work because I was able to submit work to him, to his editor, and I got in before I was 30 and had about a 25-year career in comics, and probably 15 of those years were great because Marvel, had their problems financially at one point. Like Chapter 11 really hurt the whole industry, but we all know that story, so we won't go there. But there's a lot of exciting things that happened, and I learned a lot in the first 7 years. I think I had a lot of heroes I got to meet, and a lot of inkers that I admired, and pencilers, and I think I was more of an apprenticeship for the first 7 years. So it was very busy. I think I did 4,000 pages in my 25 years, which sounds like a lot. There's a lot of guys that have done more than that, but for me that's enough. I think that's enough.
That's amazing. We talk about heroes, different. So who would be your inspirational artist when you were a child?
I discovered Marvel when I was about third grade at a carnival, and they had comic books on a big table, like stacks of them, like 5 for a quarter, and it's like a friend of mine, his mom was running it, and I got there early, and we're going through all the books, and it was like, wow, Avengers number 3, Daredevil number 1, Spiderman number 5, and it was like we had all these comics, and once we read those comics, we had been reading like DC books like Flash, and the artwork was good, Infantino and Green Lantern, it was like Gil Kane, and and some Justice League, but man, the stories were like so wooden that as soon as we started reading the Marvel stuff, we just like became Marvel collectors. And you start reading Stan's Soapbox, and you feel like you're part of the gang, a Marvel gang, and the stories and the artwork was so dynamic with Jack Kirby sort of driving the boat. And I love Steve Ditko's Spider-Man. So between Ditko and Kirby, and then they always threw in some, like Wally Wood did Daredevil for a little while, and I love Wally Wood's stuff, but he was, he went off to do his own company, and other people were great. I mean, there were a lot of great artists at Marvel.
Yeah, I felt like Jack Kirby, whenever he drew something, it felt like a story was going on in the background, even on one panel.
Yeah.
Like if there's a spaceship in the background, and there's, there could be a race of aliens attacking superheroes, but he seemed to fit all of that on a page.
Yeah.
And it kind of told its own story.
And that's the beauty. I mean, I think that you got it. It's like Kirby and Ditko were incredible storytellers, and that's the difference between them and just comic book artists. There's a lot of guys that can draw, and they draw pretty, but they don't know how to tell a story. And Marvel used to actually help train people to do that. They don't do that so much anymore, so it's very sad that a lot of the people coming out of, that are doing books and stuff now, they really don't have a clue.
So why do you think that is? Do you think it's like do you think it's costly to do that, or?
I think time and like they laid people off, and there's not as many people, but it's like it was a traditional thing. You had these artists that grew up in the industry and did all of this work, and all those guys at Marvel, they were in their 40s. When in the 60s when that was happening, they were at their prime, and that's what they say. Usually artists produce at about 45. You're at the peak, and Kirby was probably at his peak. They kept doing stuff, but those guys were hitting their stride, and that was, all of those things were there at the time, and then they just faded away as those guys started to drift away. Nobody was, restoring that. I mean, you just don't have artists like John Buscema that can draw a lion and a car and a building and humans and draw anything that, that he sees or wants to. You have people that are faking it most of the time. They're like, oh, I can take this image and I can change that, and I can use the computer, and I'll take that background, I'm going to put it here, and I'm going to, connect all of these pieces, and it's just like, that's not it. Storytelling is a real, it's like movie storyboard,
yes,
basically. And sequential art is its own thing. I've taught it. I taught art for like 13 years after I stopped doing comics. So I actually learned more probably when I was teaching than when I was actually doing the work. So it's interesting, how things have changed, but I love those days. Because there was a lot to be learned just by looking at the way the guys approached. Like you said, Kirby understood storytelling, and I think one of the big things about Jack Kirby that he tells you in some of the interviews is that he went to the movie theater when he was a kid, and it was like a nickel or whatever. He'd go to the matinee, and he'd stay all day, and he would watch the movies over and over again. Mm-hmm. And so his thing is, he says it, he became the camera. So in his mind, that's the way he saw storytelling was, he was absorbing that concept. And so movies had a big influence. And he was an animator. People don't know that. He was an in-betweener for, what was it, Fleischer Studios? Or it was the ones that did Popeye, know. And, I'm sure he didn't like that. But it forces you, because I was an animator for 10 years, it forces you to draw things you wouldn't draw. You don't want to draw. And so what Kirby came out of that with, and it was probably in him anyway, was the extremes. And in animation you have, the pose that's over here, and the pose that starts back here, and then you have all the in-between drawings, right? He could do those incredible extremes, which are the best poses, the most dynamic poses. And he managed to suck that out and put it into his storytelling. And he also understood sequential editing. When you're doing editing and timing it in a movie, you can do stuff where you're cutting and you're doing different times, where you start out in an establishing shot and you start cutting in closer and closer and closer until you're in on a close-up, which is a lot of tension, and then you back out to like a big thing. Kirby did that all the time. Yes. And it's like he would do stuff where he starts with 6-panel page, and then it was a 5-panel page or 4 or 3, and then boom, it's a double page spread, and it's like explodes on you. He had it. He just figured it out. And, Frank Miller did lots of interesting stuff with panel and storytelling, too. So there's a lot you can do in comics, but a lot of that is just not happening now. Probably more in books that are creator-owned, where they're doing Kickstarters, and you've got artists that know what they're doing. And,
definitely.
There's more of that
getting
kind
the
of stuff.
backing and so forth.
Right, and it's happening. I have a lot of friends that are still doing comics. I'm retired, and I'm thankful to be retired, but they're still out there doing those comics because they love it. It's great.
I personally feel like I wish you weren't retired. You've done so many things, for this industry. So Carnage, you have a Carnage
I do.
drawing right here.
Here's this. Let's do this first. This was like probably the most iconic piece. It's the 30th anniversary issue of Amazing Spider-Man, but it was for Amazing Fantasy, I think. So that was the 365. So this was the pinup inside, and it's turned out to be just this incredible, iconic piece that I'm known for, other Bagley's known for, and I guess Bagley has the original, and his daughter, it's the only thing she will display in her house.
I actually have
which
that.
Cracks me up.
I have that framed in my game room.
And I have pictures with Stan Lee in this picture, like from when it came out, like in 92 or something like that, or 91, and then a picture a couple of years before he passed away where we took with this picture. So it's it's the one. And these are the guys. Carnage we created when we were on the book around 361, and Venom and Spider-Man, that kept happening when I was on the book. There was a lot of that. But like you said, Carnage. This is another piece that's kind of unusual, because this is the rejected cover to 361, which was the first appearance of Carnage. So that comic is worth a lot of money now. But the story is that we did this cover, and I think Bagley wasn't excited about the anatomy on the Carnage character, and so it was rejected. So we did a different cover, and it had the action on it. I was supposed to get those covers for that issue because the inker gets every third cover. And so it was nice timing that I got it. Well, on the second one, I did get the second one back. The first one just sat around, and I thought, well, I should at least get my measly $150 or whatever for inking it. And so I filled out a voucher and sent it in. I probably shouldn't have because nobody cared, nobody wanted it, and it was going to be mine anyway. I sent it in, and it disappeared mysteriously from the Marvel offices.
Oh, wow.
It reappeared about 2 summers ago and auctioned for like $66,000. So it was stolen and then circulated around in the black market. And anyway, so it's a very valuable cover. It's one of those. And now it's been reprinted because Marvel got in touch with me, and I had a scan for them to use.
So, what inspired you to co-create Carnage?
It's like David Michelini, okay, is the writer, so we got to give him credit for really doing that. My job was really to work on the visuals with Bagley, but there was other talk about, the character itself, and I remember one of the things that was kind of driving the boat is at the time, the Terminator 2 movie was out with Arnold, and so the T-1000, the metal
form.
liquid, yeah, remember he had those spikes and he, poked people, anyway, and he was indestructible and he could, come back together. That was kind of an inspiration for Carnage. Turn him red and have him be that kind of thing where he can, like indestructible liquid metal, I don't know, whatever you want to think of, because Carnage, if he's done right, and the movies didn't impress me that much. I didn't really care because Sony's doing him. If Marvel did him, I think that Spider-Man would have been involved. And without Spider-Man, I just think the whole thing is kind of like falls apart. But they had some moments. But let's face it. The Venom and the Carnage movies weren't great. So, but it's the way it goes. If maybe Marvel will get back the rights to Spider-Man someday.
So, did you always want to be an inker, or were you at one point doing something else, say penciling?
And I thought I was going to be a penciler because I did animation and I had drawn all my life. But part of it was getting work at Marvel at that time. It was like mid-'80s. And it was good. There was work and there was new stuff. But living in Portland, I didn't want to move to New York. I was already married, and I had roots and stuff there. So working away from it because of FedEx started in about '82. And so I got in '85, so they were able to FedEx pages to you, and you could FedEx them back, and they, paid for that shipping and stuff. So inking made more sense. It was more difficult if you're a penciler. You really need to be there to go in the offices, talk to the editor. We didn't have all this stuff, that we have now. I think they had fax machines, maybe, so the early scanner, but there was no scanning stuff and emailing and all that kind of stuff. That hadn't happened yet. Computers really hadn't happened that much. So I was lucky to be able to live and have a studio in Portland, Oregon, and not have to go to New York, except for on business trips. I just go and stay for 10 days with my friends, and then we can go into the offices. That's how I did get work. So it's like, after I got Alien Legion with Chris, with Carl Potts, I went there, a month or two later, and stayed for 10 days, and we got Doctor Strange. And so, it's like just by going into the office, you got work. So it really helped to be there. And that's kind of the way it went back in those days.
I've seen your inking with the Doctor Strange and the dimensions, and have you used that?
I like that. It was fun. When Chris and I grew up together, so our minds were kind of linked up, and he lived in Portland. At that time, he was in New York, but we would talk on the phone and talk about what we wanted to do and try and improve the book, because when we got on Doctor Strange, it was about to be canceled. It was Carl Potts got the book, our editor, and he was like, okay, he goes, you could do Doctor Strange, or you can do this new book called Strikeforce Morituri, which is something he had come up with. And we go, no, we want to do the book that we have history with, and let's do Doctor Strange, because Ditko had done that. And Chris did a great job. He did tons of work on it. Unfortunately, the printing back then was so horrible. The newsprint pages, it seemed like it was even worse then than it had been, 10 years before. I don't know, they were using plastic plates or what happened. And that was just before the revolution, and everything went to offset, printing in the 90s. But boy, that artwork, if they'd reprint it now on really good, maybe they have, I may have missed that, but it certainly would look a lot better, because there was a ton of detail. You know, and it's just, you look at it and you go, really? I spent all that time on it and it looks like crap. You know, it's like, whatever.
So my final question for you, for our panel, would be, what do you think differentiates or makes a really good inker stand out from the rest?
That's a good question. I mean, I think inking, just what is inking? Because everybody goes, oh, you're a tracer. It's like a joke, right? You're a tracer. Well, there are some inkers that's all they can really do is trace the lines and do a good job of it. And there are some pencilers, if you're an inker, that are so tight, that have a line that's so tight that they want you to reproduce the line weights on that. And, you know, it's like, I don't know. I'm trying to think of somebody that I worked with that was that tight. I mean, actually, Eric Larson has an incredibly tight line. And when I was working, but he wanted me to do more of a Walt Simonson and use like a Hunt 102 crow quill and, you know, get those razor bands of, you know, swashes and stuff. So you got to loosen up a little bit. You can't just ink it as is. And he was good with that. He wanted that because he had a brush inker that was pretty stiff, you know, and brush inking is different, you know. I mean, I can brush ink, I can ink with pens, I can ink, I don't know, I must have like 7 different styles at least that I've studied, you know, impressionistic styles, you know, I've looked at different, you know, like Klaus Jensen's got a great style because it's kind of impressionistic, you know, and uses blacks well, and it helps. Okay, so what makes a good inker? An inker who can pencil. If you have somebody who's an artist who actually can draw and understands anatomy and he understands composition, he understands where black areas go. If you have somebody who's just tracing or is not a very good artist, you're not getting anything out of them other than what the penciler put down.
You're right. I believe you even taught a class on that, or you teach on that, I believe, too.
Yeah,
I've taught how to do all that.
How to get the most, because
Yes.
I wasn't a great finisher when I started, and that they paid more for that. And finishing means the penciler's just doing really loose layouts, and you've got to go in and put in a lot of the detail and make the faces look right, and in some cases put backgrounds in. And so, you know, I could do that, but I had to kind of train myself. It's a lot of work, and I had, you know, been an artist, so it wasn't impossible. Other people, it's impossible. They just, you know, forget it. You know, they're not going to be able to do great finishing work. So finishing is harder than inking, but even inking requires a style. And so you have to know and kind of, you know, I think I'd say I was about 90% successful with making all the pencilers happy that I worked with. I was able to chameleon and do what they wanted me to do, because I had enough styles and I'd had enough commercial art and animation and then inking experience. You know, but you really need to be smart about, you know, how composition works and how drawing works to make those decisions, because you're making decisions as you ink, and you can't be sitting there going, I'm afraid to put this line down, you know, I'm going to mess it up, I'm going to end up whiting it out. You know, it's like, no, you have to attack the page and have your own personality, you know, come out. And the good inkers are like that, and that's why they're good, and that's why they're known, is they have a style or they've got an actual approach, you know.
That's how when you can look at a book and say, oh, well, that's Randy EMBERLIN right
Yeah,
there. Well,
exactly.
you know.
Or Tom Palmer inked that. You know, I mean, he was somebody I studied some of his work because, you know, I bought some pages down in San Diego at the Comic-Con. I remember I still have one of the Doctor Strange pages, and there was probably like 5 or 10 lessons on that page where he put Zipatone down, and then he scratched it off, and then he used whiteout over the top, and it's just like all these special effects and stuff that he had done. We used to do special effects. Now the computer does most of that stuff, but we had to kind of create that. And, you know, using a toothbrush to get a spatter on there. I mean, there's just 100 things. How do you do star fields, you know, and make them look, you know, 3D, and there's just a ton of stuff to really know and learn. So inking is actually, it's craft-like, but it really helps for you to be an artist and then add the craft portion, and then, you know, you're a better inker. So,
Well, I want to thank you for this panel and just letting me have this interview with you. And I think everyone, we really appreciate you being one of our legendary inker, especially in this comic book community. It's very rare that we get an opportunity to meet someone like you. So we just want to thank you.
Hope to do more.
Yeah,
you know?
definitely.
I mean, that's kind of what I'm doing now that I'm retired. I get to do more shows and stuff. And, you know.
So
all right.
Thank you guys, and Tune in more.
Thanks for listening. Yeah.